Hi, I'm Jeff Murrow, and I want to welcome you to True Texas History. And today we are going to be talking about Texas's Charles Martel, otherwise known as Tom Green. Um, Now, if you don't know who Charles Martel is, I encourage you, get on the internet, check it out. He and his troops are credited with saving Europe from one of the invasions that they experienced. But anyways, you can read about that. But today we're going to talk about Tom Green. Now, at one point, because of all the accomplishments of Tom Green, Governor Pendleton Murrah went ahead and referred to him as the Charles Martel of Texas, and that's why that's in there. And at one time, if you asked a Texas school child who Tom Green was, they could tell you. I mean, Tom Green was talked about in, the schools. He's just one of the heroes of Texas. And today, crickets. I doubt many people even know who Tom Green is. And that's why we're going to talk about him. This is a picture of Tom Green. Anyways, that's who we're going to be talking about today. Tom Green was originally a Virginian, and his dad was highly educated, and he wanted to see to it that his son was educated, so he went ahead and saw to it that he received an education there at Jackson College in Tennessee, and then later on at the original UT, University of Tennessee. Now, did you know that UT, the University of Texas, had to strike a deal with the University of Tennessee in order to use that term UT? Most of you didn't, but they are the original UT because they were in existence long before the University of Texas was. But anyways, getting back to our story, Tom Green, after about a year of being in law practice, he decided to head on down to Texas. He heard about Sam Houston and the struggle for Texas independence, and he came down here. And of course, when he came down, he enlisted in the Texas Army. And of course, when you came down and you enlisted in the Texas Army, you typically swore an oath of allegiance to Texas. This is one of the things that just aggravates me to no end about the stories about David Crockett. First of all, it's David Crockett, not Davy. And second of all, when he came to Texas, he swore an allegiance to Texas. So when you see the stories about the Alamo, and they say, wow, this was an American thing. These were Americans fighting for freedom. They were Texans. Let me tell you that. They were Texans, and they swore an oath of loyalty to Texas. Some of the men who fought at the Alamo were wanted men in the United States. They weren't trying to expand U.S. territory at that point. They were fighting for Texas independence, but that's neither here nor there. But Tom Green, he fought for Texas independence. In fact, he helped man one of the twin sisters in the Battle of San Jacinto. And after it ended, some of the Texas soldiers were very angry at Santa Anna. They had seen what he had done to their troops at the Alamo. They had heard about the Goliad massacre. There were a few people that had survived it, and they knew who to blame. They also knew who to blame about Tampico. Oh, you haven't heard about Tampico? Maybe your Texas history teacher dropped the ball there. But there at San Jacinto, we were told, remember the Alamo, remember Goliad, and remember Tampico. Very few people remember Goliad, but Tampico was part of it too. And in each of those, the Mexicans went ahead and they executed all the Texians. And Tom Green and some of the other soldiers, they were furious about it, and they thought that Sam Houston was selling them out. That's why they tried to break Santa Anna out of that boat and hang him, because they felt that the man needed to answer for his war crimes. But anyways, Tom Green got prevented from doing that, but he was definitely an enthusiastic person. Um, he went back to Tennessee for a while to recruit some more men and get some supplies for Texas. And he received word, gee, veterans of the war are entitled to land grants. So he hightailed it back to Texas to go ahead and take advantage of some of those land grants. Because as a veteran of the war, he was entitled to one. So he went ahead and did that. And since he was so highly educated, they wanted him to serve as the clerk for the House of Representatives for the young Republic of Texas, and he did a good job there. Now, when trouble erupted with Mexico in 1842, Tom Green was ready for action. You know, I talked about that the other day when Adrian Woll came up here to Texas. And recaptured San Antonio. Now, when he did it, one of the things that he did, he took the entire District Court of Texas back with him. You know, what do you do when a Mexican commander comes into town and captures your whole district court and takes it off? Well, they wanted revenge. So Tom Green joined the Somerville expedition, and they were going to make Mexico pay for it. And the Somerville expedition ended up capturing Laredo. Some of the men pushed further on into Mexico, and that led to the whole Mier episode and the fight at Mier. Now, that's another good story. I have to share that with you. But Tom Green left shortly after they captured Laredo. So he wasn't part of the whole Black Bean episode and all that. But things went on a-rockin', and Tom Green was in the thick of things. And when Texas joined the Union, you know, we immediately had that war with Mexico. And Tom Green responded by issuing a call for volunteers. And he remembered how some of the buddies that he served with in the Somerville expedition were being held in Mexican prisons. And he heard stories about how bad that was. So he was eager for paybacks. And he raised up a company of volunteers, and they served under Jack Hayes. And he fought, distinguished himself actually quite well in the Battle of Monterey. Now, in that battle, which typically nowadays school children don't hear much about, the U.S. forces were 6,200, and they were outnumbered by the Mexican forces, which had about 10,000 men. So, 10,000 to 6,000, that's not real great odds. And for 3 days, the American troops were trying to take a fortress that was guarding Monterey, and were unsuccessful. So finally, Tom Green and a group of 300 Texans, Texas Rangers, charged the Mexican artillery position up on Federation Hill. And the Mexican forces, they had beat back the American attempts at that, but this time with the 300 Texas Rangers come charging at them, and they freaked out and they left. But that allowed them to go ahead and capture that key hill. The next day they captured the next hill, and once those two were taken, they were able to take the city. So that was quite an accomplishment. And for some reason, Tom Green and artillery just went hand in hand. When the War of Northern Aggression occurred, he was first with Sibley's expedition in New Mexico and William Dirty Shirt Scurry, and he ended up being involved with the capture of the cannons known as the Valverde Battery, and he kept those cannons for the rest of his command during the war. In fact, some of the things that happened, Tom Green was in charge of the sharpshooters in the Battle of Galveston, on what they call the Cotton Clads. But Tom Green commanded those, and then later on he had a cavalry command, and he fought at the Battle of Barbeau. And this was an intriguing battle, because Tom Green was used to all kinds of military tactics, and his men would follow him anywhere. And in this battle, they found a ravine, and the guards that were on post were not paying attention. He and his men went down the ravine. They got within striking distance. They jumped out of the ravine and overran the local forces, captured most of the cannons. Now, one guy made it out of there with a cannon. Let's see, who was that? William Marlin had the clarity to remove one of the cannons, retreat across a bridge, and nowadays it's known as Marlin's Bridge. And the man was given a Congressional Medal of Honor because he saved one of the cannons to keep Tom Green and his men from getting them. Now, his men loved him. In fact, they referred to him as Papa Green. And a couple other things that he did during the war. I mean, he and his men captured a gunboat, and eventually he was killed at the Battle of Blair's Landing. But this is what led Governor Pendleton Murrah to refer to him as the Charles Martel of Texas, because he always seemed to be in the thick of the fighting. Now, one other thing I forgot to mention about Monterey. See, the Texas troops were used to urban warfare, and the Battle of Monterey was a battle that the U.S. Army was not used to. They weren't used to fighting urban warfare. And this was their first major engagement in a long time there. Now, the Texans were used to it because, I mean, they had taken, Laredo. Some of them had fought in the actions at Mier and so forth, because in a lot of the going back and forth with the Texans and Mexicans during the Republic days, we developed some skill for learning how to do street fighting. And this was something that the U.S. Army needed, and that's why the Texas Rangers were a very valuable asset. They were used to this stuff back in those days. But anyways, Tom Green County was named after old Tom Green, or Papa Green, as they called him. And he is currently buried in the Texas State Cemetery in Austin. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this brief account of Tom Green, and maybe learn a little more about some of these heroes of Texas. They did a lot of things that it's hard to believe that they accomplished that much. But until next time, this is Jeff Murrah with True Texas History, wishing you vaya con Dios. Goodbye.